Welcome, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time in the middle of your week to just kind of join this conversation. We're going to talk about to either build or buy a cyber range. And my name is Josh Self. Get my slides to work. Yeah, I work at Circadence, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we do. I have a background. My path to cybersecurity really started in the military when I was 18. And I joined defense, got my electrical engineering degree, and my first kind of take at it was I did a lot of user research for the federal government. I would go around and talk to sailors, airmen, soldiers, and kind of figure out what they were doing to learn cybersecurity in a hands-on way, because we know it's a hands-on profession. And so they were creating a lot of different things, and this idea kind of a cyber range came out. And so I fed a lot of just kind of feedback to government leaders on what to do next and how can we provide better resources for our military personnel. And so I brought that experience into Circadence. A lot of our clients are really at the nation state, but obviously we serve the education sector as well. And what does it mean really to really the next phase of cybersecurity learning? Beyond just traditional lecture. And so it's been really exciting working with Cadence. I think you'll like what we have to do and what we have to offer. But there's my current interests. And also you can find me. So if you want to direct message me, or you can use the Woovo app, or you can also take a screenshot. And those are my social media feeds. And so I think when it comes to the concept of cyber ranges, I'm sure there's a lot of really great speakers, but I like to start off with kind of what are the use cases of cyber ranges, because I think it can be kind of confusing. And so where does Circadence fit and all these different things you could do with it? I think the first one is testing, right? You can test. So in the military, they have an aircraft, and there's a component that's critical to make sure it stays in the air. And so they'll use a cyber range to throw everything they can at it to see what its vulnerabilities are, to make sure that if it's flying, it doesn't come crashing down to the earth, and they do it in a safe way, and they use a cyber range. The other part is, a lot of you probably are working for academic institutions conducting research, and so you can use a cyber range to reverse engineer malware, right? Or create your own malware, but in a very safe way, because you don't want that leaking out. You can use a cyber range. Some companies, organizations, they get approached by a security vendor and maybe a SIEM tool, and they already have one, but they're being pitched left and right by the sales organizations, and they're like, okay, let's compare apples to apples. Well, you can use a cyber range to do evaluations, so you don't have to use your production environment. And you can also use a cyber range to learn, and that's really where we're focused. And why is a cyber range good for learning? Well, there's this thing called the forgetting curve, and traditionally, right, you can see over time, kind of, this has been well studied, that you can have traditional based lectures, right? But if you look at it over 3 days, if there's nothing reinforcing that, right, it can be lost. So if you can provide a hands-on way to do active learning, such as a lab, right, that retention kind of comes back up, and that curve is slightly altered a little bit. But even more important, you just don't want one practice, right? You want to maybe possibly do an assessment, wrench it up a little bit, and to provide grading and see, if they're actually kind of meeting those competencies that you've taught in your lecture and that they've practiced. And a way to really slam it home in that week is if you are able to do a review. So maybe someone who's really good, you present it to the class in some sort of playback fashion, and you kind of look and say, this is what best practice looks like, and this is what we tend not to do. And so those are some of the reasons why cyber ranges can really elevate, traditional learning, which is still really important. So what are the components? So we talked about either you can build or you can buy one. So we know why it's important, right? Because cybersecurity is a hands-on profession, much like software engineering. And so the first place to think about if you're going to build one is who your audience is, and that's really instructors and your learners. And they have different goals, different value propositions. For instructors, it's really about engaging their learners in a way that they can see actively what they're doing, what type of insights you can provide, where are the weaknesses in your learners, and where are the strengths, and how can you balance out your classroom as it continues to move forward and progress during the semester. For learners, it's all about, is it relevant to what you just taught, right? Or are we just going a completely different direction? Is it realistic? And I think this is really important. Is it realistic? Because there's ways to do labs that kind of get the point across, but is it what they're going to see? Is it going to help them be better professionals in the workplace? Is it achievable, right? Because there's different spectrums of learners. So you have people that are just getting into it. Maybe they're technology aware, or they're from IT and they're trying to get into cyber. Or you have a graduate program that, people have been in it for 10 years, right? Or you could have a blend. So you have to make sure it's achievable. And there has to be some sort of feedback loop, right? Because whether some of them are just getting in, they're learning commands, and they don't know if they misspelled something, or had a typo error. Well, they need to have that feedback when they do complete it. And that could be where you have it automated, that's inside the cyber range, it's actually tracking what they're doing, or you could do it manually. We've seen instructors do it both, right? But scale becomes kind of a challenge if you have to look over every shoulder for every command. But you have to have it, is bottom line. And so if we go over to, okay, so that's the value proposition and who you're targeting. You have to have infrastructure. I mean, so if you're going to provide for each student a complex network of virtual machines and different network topologies and operating systems, well, you have to have the infrastructure to support that. Because if you have 30 students hitting one scenario for all at the same time, and each individual have like maybe 5 virtual machines, that can be a lot. And so you have to have the infrastructure to support it. And that could be in your IT department, or it could be in the public cloud, or in your own classroom through your own lab, right? And you have to have the content, right? And so I think we're going to get into a little bit more about how to build realistic content. But one of the things you got to remember is there is some labor involved, right? So you need curriculum specialists. And I think in the education side, you guys probably you're really good at that. But the cyber experts sometimes can be a challenge, right? Because those that understand the world of cyber and have lived it, right, are best to teach it. Sometimes it's hard to recruit them, right? And so, but you're going to need them, right? So the people that understand, if you use NICE-NIST, which is a framework by the federal government, this is what you want to teach, and these are the competencies. Well, how do you build the content? Well, you need the experts to do it, and you need a platform for delivery. So you have a content library. How are students going to access it? What's the backend system to authenticate them and authorize them for that content? What's the interface look like? And so you need product managers, because it's a modern software product, it's a service, and you need designers to make sure it's not clunky and it's easily utilized, so your instructors aren't wasting time trying to figure out, and educate them on a bad interface. And you need the developers to be able to do that, and the product manager to cast the vision and set the sprint cycles. One more thing is, this is a really complex system. And I think people don't understand how complex it is to deliver hands-on learning, scenarios, i.e. labs, to students in a scalable way. So if you're going to do this, you need like a contract or a scenario specification that the platform, the learning content, and your infrastructure all agree upon. And that's something that we've invested heavily in Circadence to make sure the quality is always there, the scalability is there, the flexibility, and the delivery is there. And so, but highly recommend that you sit down and think about that with your technologist to ensure that when your program does grow and your cohort sizes expand potentially into other campuses and you're providing a service, that you're able to do it, right? But because it is a complex platform, there's going to be errors, right? Just the way of software and the way of complex infrastructure. So you need error handling and logging, right? And we have a site reliability team that manages that. So if there is a bug that's spotted, hopefully you can capture it and fix it quickly and deliver it through automation in your DevOps team before your students or your instructors even realize that. But if you don't, right, it's okay, but you need the automation in place, because there's nothing worse than having a bug and making it really painful to deliver the fix, but also the automation to when students, spin up an environment, you're not manually spending the wee hours of the evening tearing it down or trying to fix things so your students can actually access it late at night, right? Because maybe that's when you allow them to do their labs. So the automation is built so anytime, anywhere, you can fix a bug or you can release a new feature, but they can also spin up the content or the lab at their leisure, which is really important to kind of remember. We go back to that combating curve. Another thing is we're teaching cybersecurity, so we have to make sure our product is secure. Really important. Just so you need a security team. It doesn't have to be big, but just basic oversight into best practices and making sure if you're using vulnerable libraries, that at least you're aware of it, and that if there's anything going on, people from the outside attacking your system, that you can at least address it and defend it, at a reasonable rate. And the last thing, and some people forget about this, but you are offering a service. Unless you want your instructors or your professors dealing with this, things go wrong, people get confused, they forget passwords, all sorts of things. Having a help desk and a support team with the mechanisms to triage that is very important to make sure your learners are focused on what they're doing, which was trying to hit goal achievement, confidence building, things like that. So not having a support team, again, doesn't have to be big, but some system in place to triage those tickets, whether they be forget a password or email reset. Hopefully your product, your actual platform handles that, but people get confused. But maybe it's an actual issue that you need to triage into either your security team, your site reliability team, or your developers that need to address it. But you need a customer support team or some sort of support desk to handle that. So hopefully this makes sense. It's a pretty high level picture, but if you really wanted to deliver a cyber range, this is important to think about. So there's this concept of cyber range as a service. So we just talked about the build side. So what about the buy side? Well, what does it afford you? Well, you get to focus as an instructor on your lesson plans and your learning experiences, right? Which is really important because you saw how complex that system was. And the learners, just like I said, goal achievement and confidence building and learning retention. Again, trying to really retain these complex topics so that they're really prepared for the next step in their professional career and they get value from your program. We solve all the hard stuff. So that cyber range, you don't even manage it. It's just a service for you, and you just get to focus on what your core competencies are. And we call that project area. So this is Circadence's cyber range as a service. It's a hands-on platform offered a subscription-based model. Our learning scenarios cover all stages of the kill chain, and that's the Lockheed Martin kill chain, offensive or defensive, generalized or really specialized topics like ICS, SCADA. And what's really, really interesting is that our threat emulation, so in a safe way, right, each student, or potentially teams, you can also, you do team play, they get exposed to these threats, right? Real threats like botnets, ransomware, and more. And anywhere they are, because we reside on Azure, they can access it anytime. And so I think that's really powerful because a lot of the up and down and the manual stuff is kind of basically solved, but they still get that realism. And I think that's what's really important about cybersecurity is it has to be real. It's not just about configuring a tool, it's how the actual tool is deployed and utilized, and something that they would actually face in their professional world. And if you look to the left-hand side, that's a snapshot of our actual interface. And so you can tell we take really great pride in being different, and different in a good way where we try to make it engaging. We offer gamification to try to always, tip the scales in the favor of wanting to learn and wanting to take the next step. So hopefully that gives you a little perspective of why cyber range is important, what are the use cases for them, and again, what are the components if you chose to go down the path of building your own range, which is a great and noble cause, right? But if you didn't, what is a cyber range as a service, and potentially project areas where it fits. And I'm going to circle back because I think sometimes we talk about the range and we talk about realism, we talk about what we can do, but I often talk to a lot of educators because it's my job, and they suffer sometimes. It's a private. Let's just imagine it's a private post-secondary school in the great state of Pennsylvania, and they have a course in their primary liberal arts school trying to really branch into cybersecurity and engineering programs. And they had a lab and they were really growing out their cohort base and they were really getting a lot of traction, but COVID just completely upended the game for them. And so what the challenge was is they had a privately built cyber range, but there were some issues with it because one, COVID, the remote learning concept really kind of basically wiped it off the map. They couldn't use it anymore. But pre-COVID, they were struggling with their content. You know, they built some labs and they were very effective that caused their program to scale a little bit, but as it began to scale and their success, their content couldn't keep up because it was very manual. And so we get the question a lot, you know, how do you develop content, one, that can be delivered outside the classroom, right? What is the framework you use? And then two, how do you make sure it can scale so as my program succeeds, you know, how can we succeed as well so we don't have to worry about these limitations of our you know, of how we've gone to market with it. And so I think the first thing that I always like to talk about is there's a big planning concept, right? So what are your training concepts? Is this going to be a red or blue focused event? You know, we use NICE, and if you haven't looked it up, it's a really important standard that I really encourage everyone in the United States to really get behind. And it really helps with that curriculum alignment. So what are the competencies? Are you doing competency-based training or are you doing work role-based training? You know, those types of things are really important to kind of figure out. And then what's the scenario that you're designing? And we talked about, again, it's not about just configuring a tool. It's about using the tool in a realistic way. That could be defending a power plant, right? In, you know, in the Middle East, you know, that's one of our scenarios. Or it could be, you know, stopping ransomware in a financial institution. How do you bring that realism and that kind of immersion in place, right? Because it's not just about completing tasks. How do you make them feel excited about it? And so that's really your planning concept, kind of your ideation of what it's going to look and what the value of your scenario is going to be. And so building the scenario itself is this is where those cyber experts and the engineers come in. So now you know what it's going to be. Now what you know what you're going to learn and teach. So how do you architect it? And we talked about that automation. How do you make it so somebody just clicks a button, the student clicks a button and it just shows up. And when they're done with it, it goes away, right? And the orchestration of having 30 students do it all simultaneously, right? So you're not sitting there doing it manually, you know, the evening prior, right? And there's the adversary concept, right? So not all scenarios will need it, right? Not all of them, but you got to think about that. What type of malware or botnet is actually going to reside in this? And you got to actually build it, you know? And so once you kind of are past that, right, we talked about scenarios is just one aspect of the kind of the three pillars, which is the platform and the infrastructure. And so we got to make sure once that content is available, we got to make sure the front end, they can actually access it. The back end and the authorization services are ready to go, and that it collects the information that you want. And of course, if you looked at our product, we have a lot of creative assets. So we have videos, we have icons, we have all these different things to describe the content to make it easy for students to really kind of understand what it's going to do. And so they'll be much more prepared to actually execute the scenario. So you got to think about integrating all that information and then deploying. And I think, you know, we talk about this, but it's really important for educators to understand is that we talked about the automation piece, and there's concepts called continuous integration and deployment, i.e. DevOps. But that's really important to understand because it's only going to help your organization scale to the levels that I'm sure all your programs want to achieve, and especially in a post-COVID era. And of course, you need communication assets. So, you know, for us, that's kind of sales and marketing driven. You know, how do we communicate to our stakeholders and our customers that, hey, we got something new coming out, you know, check it out. But also for your learners, what are the lab materials? What are the instructor materials for, you know, knowing the answers and the grade sheets? You know, if you're using point-based system because you have hints, right? And every time they use a hint, it takes away from that score, and that's okay. But what are your communication assets across to your learners, your instructors, and also if you need to communicate it back to your accrediting body. So those are the kind of concepts you got to really think about if you're going to be, you know, not only building your own range, but actually creating your own scenarios and deploying your own content, i.e. labs. So of course, we have online resources. We have a demo video that you can really check out. Pricing, and of course, we'll make this slide deck available. We're very price transparent, but we do also offer custom content packages. And we really take a lot of energy, and we really want to be thought leaders in this space. So there's tons of digital content you can see. Example, cyber course curriculums, you know, building cyber classroom, bringing cyber classroom to life. And then if you really want to know a little bit more, because maybe I was confusing to you, But of course, we can explain it in a graphical way, particularly if your departments are new to the concept of a cyber range. We offer that stuff too. Hopefully make it a little bit easier for you guys to kind of advance your cyber programs. So thank you so much for staying with me, and hopefully you have any questions. I'm here to answer them.
So we actually do have a question from the Whova app. The first question is, what are some of the most common misconceptions about building a cyber range? And along that, what about buying a cyber range?
Misconception number one, building a cyber range is easy. It's not. Hopefully that came across. It takes intention. It's not that it can't be done. Of course it can, but eyes wide open. It's not just again, if you're just experimenting and it's just a few servers and you're just doing a few students and it's kind of a one-time thing, totally recommend that you give it a go. But if this is something that's really going to advance your program and really trying to drive students to engage and to build a brand recognition for employers, whether in your community, I highly recommend that you take the time to sit down, rewatch this video, and really think through, do you have the resources to not only invest and to build it out, both in the professionals, to do it, but also the capital investment in infrastructure. It's not easy, but it can be done. So if you're going to buy a cyber range, I first like to recommend what it is that you're trying to teach and what's your demographic, because not all cyber ranges are equal, and that's okay too. So if you're looking to say, listen, like we have boot camps and academies that, their business model is that they have to do job placement before that organization gets revenue back. So brand goodwill is really important. So those cyber professionals have to really know what they're doing. Otherwise, that academy is not going to be in business for very long. And so, realism is very, very important to them. And that's not so much for other organizations, right? That's not really their mission and their goal. It's really about the exposure. We see that a lot in high school. It's about getting them excited about the field. You might not need as much realism then. But again, it depends on what your goals are for your learners. But if you're looking for realism, make sure you get access to the product and you get a little taste of it, and you have professionals behind you that really know the industry before you make your buy decision. So if that wasn't clear, or you want to ask another follow-up question, please feel free.
So in the meantime, we actually do have another question. This one is, how do you align the exercises in your tool to a cyber course?
So I'm going to paraphrase that. How do we align our content to a course curriculum? I'm assuming that's the question.
That's how I took it.
Okay, great. So Circadians, since we map to niceness, that makes it relatively easy. What we'd like to sit with is this, our first question is what are your focus, and what is your focus of the course? Second is your demographics. So we actually practice what I just said to you. So if we understand that, then and if you do use NICE, and you might not, we like to focus on competencies or work roles. Right. So if we understand by week, here's the work role we're focused on, or here's the competencies that we're focused on for this week, then we can take it and map it back to the tasks that actually map to the KSAs, that map to the competency areas, and it gives us kind of that glue, right? Because cybersecurity is, I think, not the most standardized industry yet. If we're working there, we're getting there. So that's kind of how we glue things together, because some people like to focus on, also like certifications, like we want to be prepared for CompTIA, or a SANS course or EC Council, what have you. So it depends on really how you come in and where your experience is that we like to meet you at. But we ideally like to sit with a NICE framework. That's typically where we see the most success.
Thank you for your answer. Oh, we actually do have another question. Do you recommend students learn cyber on a range or through internships, or a combination?
Oh, one of the greatest things about cybersecurity, it was pioneered by non-traditional people, right? So that's, that everyone's journey is different. And I think everyone learns differently. I think the rule of thumb for cyber, if you're in the technical space, I just did a speak engagement for a group of high schoolers about to graduate, and cyber is not just technical, right? There's many areas you can get into, but if you're focused on the technical side, I think if you just follow the premise, you cannot, just like coders, you cannot learn how to code JavaScript by watching a video. You have to get in and mix it up, roll up your sleeves and pull up VS Code and contribute to libraries. The same thing in cybersecurity, whether you get that through hands-on experience at an internship, if you're so fortunate in today's world, or you get it through a boot camp, or your college, or you do it yourself. The only thing I would recommend is you get the hands-on experience, however you can do it. And if you do it multiple ways, that's awesome.
All right, so for now, that looks like all the questions, but I will check back right before we end here. But as of now, thank you, Josh, for your presentation and answering questions. Again, we encourage all of you to check out Circadence, through the Whova app. If you have the time, please rate the session on Whova as well. It will help provide feedback so we can improve as much as we can throughout this conference. And next up in the conference, we just have a lunch break, and during it, there will be a dark web discussion by the Virginia Cyber Range founder, David Raymond. We actually do have one more question.
Nice. Keep them coming, Michael.
And what is the biggest challenge you are facing with CyRAS? I'm not sure if I did that right.
Oh, it's Cyber Range as a Service. The biggest challenge?
Yes.
The biggest challenge we're facing, I think, for Circadence in our journey, we started on premise, and we realized that all the things I mentioned, scalability, accessibility, I think flexibility. I'm going to get a little financial. When you invest in your own data center, there's a lot of capital investment involved in there, and sometimes you get a big opportunity, and it's just too big, and so you always got to protect the maximum use case, right? So 100 users at one time, right? And you got to have the infrastructure for that. Our shift to the cloud was, I think, the best thing we could have ever done, because it kind of eliminates us from having to worry about a lot of things that, if you own your own private data center, you got to worry about. It's the same kind of sales pitch if you were Azure or AWS gives everyone, or Google. The benefits of the cloud really helped us with Cyrus. And so it gave us the ability to focus on more important things, like how do you deliver content across the globe, right? So if you have customers in the UK and in the APAC region or the Asia region, how do you do that? That doesn't impact latency, right? That doesn't, how do you get load times better? If you're trying to automate, 30 students accessing a piece of content that has, 30 virtual machines in it, they're all networked together, and all the services around that, how do you get it from a 40-minute load time down to like a 5 to 10-minute load time? So those are some of the challenges we've invested since we've been able to shift into the cloud and not have to worry about a lot of the infrastructure pieces and the security around it. But it's really about the latency, delivery models, scaling up to students, at various frequency levels, like one group cohort will start over here, at 9 o'clock Eastern, and the other one will be late at night in potentially Hawaii or in Asia or Australia. How do you deal with that? And how do you make it a great user experience, across the board? So that's where we've been really focused on.
All right, so I think those are all the questions. Again, thank you for your presentation and your time. And we hope to see you guys at lunch, which starts in 12 minutes at 12 o'clock. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Be safe.